The Old Kingdom ancient Egyptian site of Abu Sir is perhaps not as well known as those that neighbour it. To the north, the Giza Plateau with its iconic stone pyramids. And to the south, the vast necropolis of Saqqara with its miles of labyrinthian subterranean passages, huge bedrock shafts, and not to mention the remarkable galleries of the Serapeum. One reason for this might be that the site has been closed to the general public since roughly the year 1907, well over 100 years at this point, and has only been accessible during this time by special permission with the Ministry of Antiquities. Despite its lesser-known status, however, Abu Sir is one of the most impressive and important sites in the Pyramid Belt, running down the western side of the Nile in northern or lower Egypt, with easily the most examples of advanced ancient machining and tooling amongst its peers, and it's a site that I've been visiting regularly since 2015. Abu Sir, like many of the pyramid sites, has been and continues to be an active archaeological zone, and has seen some significant new excavation work in the last 18 months or so. These digs have revealed some incredible finds, more evidence for advanced machining into hard stone, and connections to other out-of-place artifacts, serving only to deepen the mystery and origins of this site. In this video, we're going to get into the details of these new finds, the changes that I've observed at Abu Sir over the last decade, and dig into the fascinating history of work here and just what's been uncovered, at least according to the archaeological journals. My name is Ben. You're watching Uncharted X, and this is a deep dive into the amazing site of Abu Sir. Before we get into the weeds, and literally I mean into the weeds, a quick channel update.
Well, you're from Australia, mate. Not a snake alive could take Ben Van Kirkwood.
I recently passed 500,000 subscribers, so I wanted to pause and extend a big thank you to everyone who has subscribed here on YouTube. When I started this a few years ago, I never thought that these sort of numbers were possible, particularly for this type of niche rabbit hole content. It's not reaction, commentary, or drama content, or whatever other celebrity/Hollywood culture stuff is ticking on over on the trending page. For that reason, I do rely on the value for value model, and as always, I'm hugely grateful to everyone who does support the channel. I don't do sponsorships or this video brought to you by segments despite constantly getting offers, and I'd rather not sell out and pitch you a VPN or some shady art investment scheme or even a worthless piece of paper that says you're now a Scottish lord. So in that case, I guess I can say that this video is brought to you by the value for value model. Much gratitude to all of the channel supporters and to everyone who's signed up over on Patreon or YouTube channel memberships, Subscribestar or Locals. If you think my work is worthy of some value coming back to me, all of the details for that are over on my website at unchartedx.com/support. As we're talking about Abu Sir today, if you want the chance to see it for yourself and visit it with us on a special permission access, along with a ton of other sites in Upper and Lower Egypt, I'm running my annual tour in March 2025. As always, my good friend Yusuf Awan will be guiding, and I'm joined by Kyle and Russ from Brothers of the Serpent podcast. These tours have proven to be a great time. We do a 4-night Nile cruise, and they're built around at least 6 special permission accesses. Things like private visits into the Great Pyramid, going down into the Osirion, and this year we'll be getting into some sites that I've never seen before. We're even tacking on an optional extension at the end of the tour to the Red Sea for some rest, relaxation, and diving. All of the details are on my website at unchartedx.com/Egypt2025. I'll also be there in December of this year, 2024, as a host on Yusuf's Primordial Egypt trip, and there are still a few spots available. It's a similar tour to my one, less days, less special permissions, and hence less cost, but it's a great chance to get to see Egypt before prices go up in 2025. After the Egypt tour in March, in April of 2025, we're going back to Turkey with the same crew, including Yusuf, for a 13-day tour around the epic ancient sites there. Starting in beautiful, biblical Şanlıurfa, we'll be visiting Göbekli and Karahan Tepe, some quarries, hitting Sogmatar, take a cruise on the Euphrates River, and visit enigmatic Mount Nemrut, as well as more. We'll travel to Cappadocia, visit the underground city of Derinkuyu, and spend some time in the Phrygian Valley with its mysterious cart ruts. So, if you're interested in joining us in Turkey, again, the details are on my website at unchartedx.com/Turkey2025. Lastly here, a quick heads up that I'll be speaking at the Metaphysical Egypt conference in Cairo in early April, and later this month in October of 2024, I'll be speaking at the CPAC conference in beautiful Northern California. All of the links to those conferences are below in the description. Now, back to the video. Located just north of Saqqara and south of the Giza Plateau, which are all on the west bank of the Nile near the city of Cairo, Abu Sir and its nearby connected sister site, the Sun Temple of Abu Ghraib, exist in the desert, going mostly unnoticed by the millions of tourists in luxury coaches that visit the pyramids to either side of them. Looking at it on Google Earth, you can see the scale of the site, with 3 medium-sized or so-called royal pyramids, a host of smaller pyramids, mastabas, and causeways, as well as many other previously excavated areas. From Abu Sir to the south, you can clearly see the step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara and the giant Giza pyramids on the skyline to the north. It's one of the characteristics of the pyramid sites of Lower Egypt that you can see adjacent pyramids from each location, at least on clear days. Going back to the satellite imagery, you can see the extent of the work and the structures here. Honestly, I think you could almost consider Abu Sir as possibly being one continuous site with Saqqara. There are quite clearly structures in the desert between them, things like the Mastaba of Ptahshepses, and many more that aren't named, at least on Google Earth. In fact, I suspect there's a good chance that the entire pyramid belt was occupied at some point, including the distance between them and the sites connected. From Abu Rawash all the way in the north, down through Giza, Zaywat el-Aran, Abu Ghraib and Abu Sir, to Saqqara and then on to Dashur with its massive bent and red pyramids. Indigenous Sufi legends and tales speak of tunnels that once might have run between these sites. These legends are told by figures like the famous and well-known guide Abdel Hakim Ayawan, may he rest in peace, who's interacted with figures like John Anthony West, Robert Bauval, and Graham Hancock, and who is reported to have said that at one time a man could walk from Giza to Saqqara without the sun touching his back. I assume this doesn't mean at night time, but rather through a system of subterranean tunnels. Certainly there are plenty of underground mysteries and unexplored, unexcavated features at these sites. Saqqara is literally riddled with deep tunnels, chambers, and shafts, like the documented miles of them beneath the Step Pyramid, the true extent of which is still not known. Likewise, the Giza Plateau has many entrances that run deep into the bedrock below the surface, and not just beneath pyramids. Alongside the Great Causeway are many deep shafts, the most famous being the Osiris shaft, with 3 levels, and unexplored collapsed tunnels that lead off from the deepest chamber, which today sits beneath the level of the water table. Whether or not such subterranean features exist at Abu Sir is unknown, although the site was documented in the modern age as far back as the Lepsius expedition around 1842. Although, interestingly, subsequent explorers like Maspero or Auguste Mariette, who walked these lands later on in the 19th century, never marked it on their maps, despite doing extensive excavations in northern Saqqara, which essentially connects to Abu Sir. Since the 1960s, however, excavations here have been conducted under the purview of the Czech Institute of Egyptology, a part of the Charles University in Prague. Unencumbered by tourism infrastructure, or tourists for that matter, teams of archaeologists have been working over the decades in many areas on the site. They've made some remarkable discoveries. Many of the ancient hardstone vases that I like to talk about, like this one, have been found here, as well as some of the most interesting precision granite boxes I've ever seen that were found in underground chambers in the Mastaba of the Vases Ptahshepses. We'll get back to these boxes a little bit later in this video. There has been a huge number of artifacts found here, and those are just the ones that I can find documented in the extensive works from the Czech Institute. The site had been excavated well before the Czechs have got here, throughout the 19th and 20th century, as I mentioned, and during the Arab Spring in the early 2010s, Abu Sir was extensively pillaged in a series of quote-unquote illegal excavations, so who knows the full extent of just what's been taken from the site. Generally speaking, Egyptology attributes Abu Sir to the 5th dynasty of the Old Kingdom. The thought is that the Giza Plateau was full with the works of the 4th dynasty kings like Khufu and Khafra, and the kings of the 5th dynasty needed a new place for their own funerary monuments, and high-placed officials during this period began building their own mastabas and large funeral complexes. Obviously, I don't think the Great Stone Pyramids at Giza were ever built as tombs, and there are huge problems with trying to tie the construction timelines with the reigns of the pharaohs associated to them, a problem I explored extensively in this video. Check it out if you haven't seen it, the link is below in the description. Despite the attribution of Abu Sir to the 5th dynasty, there have been artifacts and inscriptions found here that date it further back, to the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd dynasties, and even into pre-dynastic archaic times. That's not to say that the 5th dynasty rulers weren't here, they certainly were, and they left their mark, but as with most of these ancient sites, you're looking through layers of work, and the true history of Abu Sir is longer and more complex than the brief authoritative description you typically get from official guides when visiting. In ancient times, there was a small lake here, as well as a wadi, like a creek, around which the tombs were dug. The site and the excavations show the scale of the work done here in ancient times. It was continually occupied and used throughout the ancient Egyptian civilization and the ones that followed it. One area that's recently been excavated is a spot I've long been interested in, and that is the end of the causeway of the Sahure Pyramid Complex. This causeway is typically how you access the site when visiting it with a special permission, and like the pyramids at Giza, the whole complex attached to the pyramid consists of several structures. There is the pyramid itself, the so-called mortuary or pyramid temple in front of it, the causeway, and then the valley temple at the other end of the causeway. To either side of the causeway were, evidently, more structures, and this is another area the archaeologists have been busy in. They've apparently been unearthing the remnants of them to either side of it, and the walls and blocks here have, allegedly at least, steles and inscriptions. I say allegedly because you can't see them. The archaeologists working in this area have documented their finds and then covered them up with a sheet of perspex, followed by bricks and cement. You can see the layer of perspex or acrylic protecting the face, and then the bricks and concrete over the top of it. I get that this is to protect the inscriptions, but where's the data? Who knows when or if we will ever know what was on these walls? I find this approach fairly annoying, I suppose is the word, as only the team members working for the university get to see the detail on the ancient walls. And although the Czech Institute has been pretty good about publishing their finds, certainly better than many other archaeological teams, it's still only a handful of documents for the 50 plus years of work that they've done here, and some of these documents can't be sourced or have bad links, at least when I was trying to find them. Some others aren't even available publicly other than via sources such as the Internet Archive. As usual, independent researchers and interested people are left at the mercy of the archaeologists as to when, or even if, details and data on new finds like these steles at Abu Sir are ever released. It's not unknown for it to take more than a decade for results and findings to be published, if they ever are. This process of uncovering new details and discoveries only for them to be privately documented and then reburied or covered isn't unique to this site. It happens all the time. We even saw it happening live earlier in 2024. Because we had to cancel our tour extension to Lebanon and Baalbek for obvious reasons, and due to there being such a big waitlist to get onto the last Egypt trip, we decided to run 2 tours while in Egypt with a 2-week break in between, resulting in a 6-week stay in Egypt. It was great, but it meant we were visiting the same sites about 4 weeks apart. At nearby Abu Ghurab on our first visit during this period in February of 2024, the entire courtyard in front of the obelisk base had been excavated. There was a team working there, taking detailed photographs of the bedrock and remnants of structures. When we came back 4 weeks later, in March, the entire area was covered back in with sand. Who knows when or even if the data and images taken here will be shared? Maybe it'll be in some paper, maybe it'll come out in a year or 10 or never. This is what I'm talking about, and I'm sure it's going on at lots of places, all the time, and I'd just love it if some of the archaeologists were a bit more transparent about what they were working on, and sharing some of the raw data. I know there's efforts inside the academic community to gain a bit of popularity on the internet, and I really think that the non-partisan sharing of actual real raw data and findings would go a long way to achieving that, as well as leveraging the interests of the many independent researchers looking into these sites and topics who don't have jobs in the academic institutions. That doesn't mean that their input or opinions are worthless, far from it, but that's the impression you get from the current crop of public-facing vocal academics, guys like John Hoops or Flint Dibble, who, despite their echo chambers, are somehow having trouble connecting with the broader audience with their tactics of labelling anyone with an alternative opinion as pseudo-archaeologists, ancient alien proponents, or even somehow racists or white supremacists. Graham Hancock has borne the brunt of this dog whistle assault, and as someone who's known Graham for around a decade now, I can't express just how utterly ridiculous these claims about him are, but that's been the tactic. I called this nonsense out back in 2019 in an early livestream on this channel discussing the Society of American Archaeology's 26-page attack on Hancock, led by John Hoops, and using all the same talking points of aliens, racism, etc.
But this next bit is what really just made me shake my head. I just couldn't believe what I was reading. And you know, there's articles later on that actually get into this. But get this. So this is again the introduction. Quoting: "We assert that fringe beliefs should receive even greater attention as topics of valid academic inquiry." Fair enough. "Pseudo-archaeology actively promotes myths that are routinely used in the service of white supremacy, racialized nationalism, colonialism, and the dispossession and oppression of indigenous peoples." Wow, he's pushed all the buttons. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous.
These same arguments never changed when Hancock released his Netflix series Ancient Apocalypse. They just got amplified as more mainstream media began to pay attention. It's quite the bizarre state of affairs. And yes, just to forestall the questions, I know that Flint Dibble was recently on Danny Jones's podcast, and Danny pressed him on the topic of the ancient precision hardstone vases. I haven't had the chance to watch it all, but just what do you expect when you ask an archaeologist engineering questions? I've long said that you wouldn't ask an archaeologist to design the chair that he's sitting on, but if it's an ancient chair, he's going to claim expertise on everything about it. Turns out the same thing is true for vases. His demeanour and dismissal of the engineering work done on these things, and the reaction he's getting in the comments and online, is proof positive of the problem the academics are facing, and of the echo chamber they evidently live in. I'm sure the handful of people Flint hasn't blocked on Twitter yet are probably cheering him on. But to the rest of us, you'd think that some humility here and an acknowledgement that he's not an expert in engineering or precision topics would be a more reasonable response. I mean, I assume the guy flies around on planes sometimes, so at some level he's trusting the work of the aerospace engineers and metrologists who design and make the parts that go in jet engines. These are the same experts who are making the observations and discoveries on artifacts like the vases, and who are generally astounded with the precision and technological sophistication of ancient stonework and tooling witness marks. This is because they actually understand what it takes. I see it all the time. I get engineers and other experts on every tour in Egypt, and I love hearing their insights and observations. Unfortunately, Flint seems determined to just ignore or dismiss the remarkable new discoveries being made on these artifacts, evidently because he either doesn't know or doesn't like what it means. This is the problem, and the science of archaeology needs to adapt itself to become truly multidisciplinary, to take the opinions of real experts in segments of the field, engineers, metrologists, manufacturing and construction experts, and others, if they want to get closer to the truth, if that's even the goal. I'm really not sure that it is. It seems like it's mostly about protecting their own positions as the arbiters of historical truth, even as they watch the internet and independent researchers doing an end run around them.
But now, Archaeology is completely different. Archaeology is science.
Anyway, rant over, let's get back to the causeway at Abu Sir. Of the causeway itself, only the foundation blocks remain, with a couple of Tura limestone slabs to show the original floor level. Similar to the Great Causeway of the Middle Pyramid at Giza, this was once fully cased, probably also with walls and a roof. Interestingly, the causeway does have channeled blocks, essentially some sort of infrastructure, running well beneath the original floor level. Back in 2016, you could see where this channel went down near the end of the causeway, as shown here. In the last few years, however, this part of the causeway has disappeared into the sand, and its true end and any connected structures to it have long been obscured and overgrown by thick bush off to the east. There is quite obviously a source of water here, for this much green to be growing all on its own in the desert sands. Despite a couple of attempts to get in there over the years, bush bashing, as we might say in Australia, the date palms and the vegetation make it a difficult proposition, not to mention the critters and snakes that are likely living in there. I had always heard from Yusuf that hidden somewhere in this were some very interesting stones, some with tubular drill holes, the remnants of an original structure. So I was quite surprised when visiting the site in early 2024 to find that this scrub and vegetation had all been cleared out, the date palms burnt, and the structure at the end of the causeway has been partially excavated, revealing some intriguing details. We can see the remnants of a megalithic structure, with the familiar stone types of granite, basalt, and limestone in use. This excavated area is connected to the causeway and has quite a few large limestone blocks still in place that seem to have been rebuilt or reinforced by smaller stones, likely to create habitable structures in relatively recent centuries. I suspect that these are the limestone core blocks, and that they might very well have been cased in granite, as there is plenty of granite fragments laying around, as well as a couple of very interesting granite blocks. This one in particular is suggestive that the structure here might have been cased. First of all, the piece has obviously been quarried. You can see the face of it that's been split, but it has some other details that are just fascinating. It's upside down, and the curved section is very similar to the curve you find on many of the granite cornice blocks from the mighty Valley and Sphinx temples at Giza. This might well be the only remaining example of a granite cornice that once existed on the original structure here at the end of the causeway at Abu Sir. In the cases of cornice blocks found on other sites, like those at Giza in the Valley and Sphinx temples, they're on structures with limestone cores and are part of the granite casing. This curved cornice shape provides a stylistic or form link between structures that we know existed in the Old Kingdom, although who knows how old they already were at that point. Using links like this, the stylistic or form connection of the curved cornice, along with the large megalithic nature of the blocks and the evident precision of the shaping and finishing, allows us to correlate the construction of these structures on different sites to the same culture and roughly the same time period. This technique of form dating is one used widely by archaeologists who use it whilst studying the remnants of ancient civilizations all around the world, and as a method isn't remotely controversial. We can use this same technique of form or stylistic matching to draw out some other very interesting links between sites and artifacts. Another feature of this block in the newly excavated area of Abu Sir provides a further stylistic link, one that is, at least to me, more intriguing, and that is the bullnose or ridge that's carved into it. Finding a bullnose like this on an Old Kingdom structure is not something that I've seen before. It's very similar to bullnoses found on granite blocks and artifacts far in the south in Upper Egypt, particularly those on Elephantine Island, which are all generally attributed to a rebuild there in the late period of ancient Egypt around 380 BCE. This is a long time after the accepted dates for the Old Kingdom work at Giza and Abu Sir, which is roughly in the 2700 BCE timeframe, well over 2,000 years prior. Bullnoses are prominently evident on large granite blocks here on Elephantine Island, And, as many of you will know, there is the frankly epic granite box or shrine that's still complete and laying in the sand on this site, and it has runs of bullnoses all over it. This is only one of several such boxes that were originally here, and you can find evidence for similar features in the fragments of different types of precisely machined granite lying nearby. This bullnose on the box, in particular the faceted unfinished portion, has revealed some startling revelations as to the construction methods and machining of granite, and I've made a full video in the past looking into this aspect of ancient stonework, link below. As it happens, after I made that video, on a subsequent visit to Elephantine Island, we found further evidence for this same faceting technique on large granite blocks with bullnoses located elsewhere. What makes this stylistic link between the block at Abu Sir, that was absolutely existent in the Old Kingdom, and the stonework on Elephantine Island, which is generally attributed to the late period, so interesting is that it lends credence to the idea that these artifacts and stonework on the island could be much older than the late period. It's quite possible that this stonework and artifacts like the granite box were inherited and reused, repurposed in renovations and rebuilding, rather than they themselves being created then. This idea is backed up by more evidence that suggests the boxes here might well have been already broken in the late period, and the pieces were in the process of being quarried to be reused for statuary or steles. On the underside of a large broken black granite box, you can see the clear outline, made in red paint, of an Egyptian figure. Obviously here there was an intention at some point to quarry this box and use this piece somewhere else. In a recent video looking at the erosion on the Giza Plateau, and in my presentation videos, The Tale of Two Industries and the connections between out-of-place artifacts, I make the argument that precision artifacts and stonework, like these boxes, or structures like the Valley Temple, and the technology that made them, might well belong to a lost culture even older than the dynastic Egyptians. The idea that certain structures and artifacts might have been inherited by them, rather than created by them, has a lot of evidence behind it, particularly in the technological and engineering comparisons between known ancient Egyptian tools and techniques, the results of them, and the more precise work with very different witness marks and logistical challenges. Check out these videos, links below, if you want to learn more about what's behind this claim, but just for the sake of argument, let's assume for the time being that objects like the box on Elephantine Island were indeed inherited and reused. We can find similar evidence for this hypothesis at other temples in Upper Egypt. In particular at the beautiful Temple of Horus at Edfu, a Ptolemaic or Greek-Roman era construction, built starting in the year 237 BCE by Ptolemy III. This spectacular temple is well known for its amazing inscriptions, covering almost every inch of the sandstone walls and structure. These inscriptions include passages carved on the inside of the northwestern corner walls from the god Thoth that speak of the creation story of the ancient Egyptian civilization. Translation of the epic amount of text at Edfu has been going on for around a century now, but starting in 1986, much of this work is being revisited by the German Edfu project, led by Dieter Kurth, and they're translating the Edfu texts into German using a more modern understanding of hieroglyphics. The author Manu Seyfezada, who wrote one of my favourite recent books, Beneath the Sphinx, published a paper in April 2024 in the journal Archaeological Discovery that looked at this creation story, which traces back to the pyramid texts of the Old Kingdom and translated the German work into English. It's a very interesting paper, likely something that I'll cover in a future video, with obvious corollaries to the fabled story of Atlantis, as related by Plato in his dialogues. I'll leave a link to the paper in the description below if you want to check it out. Back onto the inheritance topic, the Temple of Horus at Edfu also contains an enigmatic artifact in its inner temple, known as the Holiest of Holies. A granite box, or shrine, one that is virtually identical to the box found on Elephantine Island. It's quite tough to get a good look at it when you're visiting the temple, as they've got a recreation of a solar boat sitting right in front of it, and a fence to keep the hordes of tourists out. It's always busy here on this site, along with the Komombo Temple, because these are normally visited by the Nile cruise ships, which are all on a similar schedule, and you end up with all of the boats, and hence the tourists, visiting at the same time. I have had the chance to get behind this barrier a couple of times, however, and to get some footage and images up close to the box. It has the same features, it's almost identical. It has the same bullnose as the box on Elephantine Island. It has the same obvious precision, but this one at Edfu has been hammered on with chisels and partially engraved. And there's also obvious signs of wear and damage to the surface. Is it possible that this is in fact an older, inherited and revered artifact? An artifact that was worshipped and included in the holiest of holies at this huge sandstone temple built in the Ptolemaic period? An artifact with stylistic links going back to stonework that existed in the Old Kingdom, being used as the centerpiece, venerating the vastly ancient culture being documented on the walls of the temple here. It seems reasonable to me. The shrine at Edfu looks obviously ancient in its wear, and the sandstone temple itself doesn't show anything like the technological sophistication in terms of stonework as the box does, let alone in comparison to the massive granite temples of the Old Kingdom that stylistically link to it. Interestingly, we do find many representations of this box, or at least its shape, on the inscriptions and drawings found around the walls of the temple. Although I have no idea what it represents, it does seem to be a central icon. Another revelation in the newly excavated area at Abu Sir are a couple of granite blocks, probably part of the walls or entryway to the original structure.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, I'm coming down.
These also feature the same bullnose of granite that we've been talking about. It's unlikely that these are in their correct orientation or position. I suspect they were horizontal rather than upright originally. Whatever structure was here back in the day, it was clearly megalithic and made from large blocks of limestone, basalt, and granite. The remaining blocks of basalt show similar construction techniques to other buildings at Giza, like the Valley Temple, big blocks of stone with the iconic around-the-corner method of flattening and finishing the surface. The roof of the original structure here at Abu Sir was evidently held up, along with the walls, by large columns, as we can still see the granite bases for what were evidently large single-piece columns. Back up at the other end of the causeway, in the courtyard of the Sahure Pyramid Complex, there are still a few of these columns standing, and some that are restored. I've talked about these before. They're also found in another Old Kingdom site at Saqqara, and today the columns from there are in the Cairo Museum, at the back of Old Kingdom statuary rooms, going mostly unnoticed by tourists. These Old Kingdom columns share a stylistic or form connection with columns that are found on later New Kingdom and late period sites, and this is the same stylistic technique we were just using on the cornice and bullnose shapes. The same style columns, large, single piece, made from granite with flared ends, very challenging from a manufacturing perspective, are also found in large numbers on sites like Luxor Temple, Tanis and Bastet, all attributed to later periods. The best preserved example is one at the Temple of Bastet. It's the broken end of what was a huge column, and it's one of my favourite artifacts in all of Egypt. It's just spectacular. Once again, I think it's possible that we're looking at older inherited artifacts that were reused in later renovations on these sites that are attributed to the New Kingdom or later. Back at Abu Sir, it wouldn't be an Abu Sir discussion if I didn't mention the prominent features here of machining and cutting into stone. It's what made this site so memorable for me and a must-visit location every time I'm in Egypt. In some ways, Abu Sir is responsible for putting me on this path in the first place. During my first visit to Egypt back in 2015, touring with Graham Hancock, and yes, it was the tour with the infamous debate.
Don't say this word to me. It's a shame on you, not on me.
But on one day of the tour, when the rest of the group went into Cairo to shop in bazaars and to see the mosques, a couple of us decided to connect with a local guide to see another pyramid site that we hadn't heard of. That local guide happened to be Yusuf Aoun, and the site was Abu Sir.
Being made by hand or anything, that it was really powerful, the pressure of it while it was spinning was so powerful to create this kind of pattern.
Because each rotation is pushing in like that millimeter or whatever, right?
Yes.
That's so you need a tremendous amount of pressure.
It doesn't screw in. It's quite uniform.
Well, yeah, it's that's the thing. Every cut, that's a rotation of pushing in. If it was a lot slower process, you wouldn't have those marks.
So this type of granite, as we call it granodiorite now, is harder than the rose one actually. And I don't know if you all heard this, but when you see part of it that it's smooth like until here, and then the rest is rough like this one, that's because until here there was the floor. And also it means that they brought the stone like this rough, and then they had the tools to shape it and finish it on the side.
Needless to say, my mind was entirely just blown up that day. I was being shown the smoking guns of evidence for sophisticated ancient machining, far beyond the known capabilities of the dynastic Egyptians, and it was all over this little-known and rarely seen location. Around 18 months after this experience, I quit my day job to pursue this topic full-time. It had become an obsession. All I could think about were the historical mysteries and massive contradictions in what I'd been told about our past. And it really all started with a day trip to Abu Sir. On this site, you can find incredible examples of large circular saw cuts made into hard stone like basalt, and I've explored them and their history of discovery as well as their mainstream explanations in previous videos. There are also more examples of tubular drilling into hard stone here at Abu Sir than can be found on any other site, although they certainly exist on other sites. They're even on the pyramids. For example, here are some tubular drill holes into the granite of the Great Pyramid, a little-known feature. Here's another one. It's an excellent tubular drill hole made into granite that is found in the mortuary temple of the Menkaure, or Third Pyramid. It's a topic that I've done deep dives into in the past, particularly in this video. It's one of my most popular, and the history and controversy around ancient tubular drills makes for a fascinating story. On the granite blocks in the newly excavated area at Abu Sir, more of these tubular drill holes have been revealed, and I don't think these have been shared by anyone as of yet. They very much match the other examples found on this site, which are also made into granite and basalt. That familiar inset where the stone has been carved away and indented before the drilling was started. Just as familiar are the deep grooves or tool witness marks from the machining process that you can see inside the hole. It kind of blows my mind that these have never actually been studied. You'd think that getting a latex mold of the inside of any of the complete holes on this site and using it for analysis would be a fairly basic task, and it won't hurt anything. It would be revealing to use the same process, the one done by Chris Dunn and the Petrie Museum, with a latex mold that allows the three-dimensional features and circular witness marks to be laid out flat in 2 dimensions. In Chris Dunn's case, applied to Petrie's infamous core number 7, which was discovered by Flinders Petrie at Giza and is literally a piece of scrap that was discarded after the drilling process, this latex mold technique showed that the witness marks on the core are made up of deep and continuous spiral grooves. This finding and its implications when it comes to the penetration rate of the tool that made these marks into very hard stone is incredibly challenging to our understanding of ancient stoneworking. Although no latex molds of the tube drill holes at Abu Sir have been made, at least as far as I know, I do have some very good photogrammatical scans of a few of them. They are in high resolution and clearly show sections of the grooves. I think that there has to be a way in 3D software to do the same thing, essentially. Flatten it out to show the features of the lines and grooves on a flat plane and determine if they're spiral or not. I'm certainly no expert in Blender or other 3D applications, and I so far haven't had a lot of luck with the couple of people I've contacted to try and get this done. So if you think you know a way to do it, I'd love to hear from you. The last topic I want to get into is a couple of artifacts also high up on my favourites list. the remarkable granite boxes that are still on location in the Mastaba of the Vases of Ptahshepses at Abu Sir. These were discovered during excavations led by Miroslav Werner and the Czech Archaeological Institute in the mid-1970s. They had to dig this entire structure out of the desert sand. I've had the chance to get in here several times. It's not always a guaranteed thing, as even when you visit the site with special permissions, the Mastaba is not always open. Inside the Mastaba there is an impressive courtyard with 20 large inscribed limestone pillars that show quite a bit of erosion on top. Why the rest of the pillar bodies don't show the same erosion makes sense when you see the dig photos, as only the tops of them were exposed when the work started, nearly 50 years ago now in the 1970s. Wow, okay, saying that kinda hurts, as I was born in the 1970s myself. It's insane to think of how different the world was back then and how old I am now. The different levels of erosion on these square pillars are proof positive that limestone buried under sand doesn't erode anything like as quickly as surfaces that are exposed to the elements. It really makes you wonder about the wind and sand explanations that are used to explain the erosion on the body of the Great Sphinx, as well as the walls of the Sphinx enclosure, given those, for the vast majority of literally thousands of years, have been buried under the sand. This is a topic I've explored in a couple of videos, particularly this one, as it gets into the details of Cavillia's excavation of that area, which was the first one in relatively modern times. I've also explored the topic of limestone erosion in a recent video looking at the megalithic monuments at Giza, links are below. The Czech Institute also found some other large artifacts when digging out the Mastaba, what seemed to be broken sections of fluted or reed-style columns, and I was just amazed when I saw these images. These evidently were single-piece limestone columns, and they've been restored from their broken parts and erected at the front of the Mastaba. They seem to be very intricately detailed, no signs of hieroglyphs that I saw, and you can even see the imprint that they left on the column bases. The closest similarly styled columns that I know of are ones that you can find at Luxor and Karnak temples in Upper Egypt.
See the granite pillars, all granite pillars, and then these are sandstone, stacked sandstone rounds.
Once again, we have the same thing going on. Artifacts that are discovered at early Old Kingdom sites with clear form matches to those found on sites attributed to much later periods. In this case, for Karnak and Luxor temples, the New Kingdom, at least 1,500 years later, hinting at the possibility that granite columns like this one at Luxor might well have been here for a very long time indeed. This theory is backed up by the fact that on these New Kingdom sites we also find sandstone imitations of the older work, made from rounds or blocks of stone that are then shaped down, clearly imitations of the much more complex and difficult single-piece columns made from granite. The huge open courtyard at Luxor has many of these columns, all made from smaller blocks of sandstone. Once you start seeing the technological delta present on these sites, the obvious tale of two industries, you begin to notice it more and more. Speaking of a technological delta, the prime artifacts in the Mastaba at Abu Sir are undoubtedly these two single-piece granite boxes. Although they haven't been scanned or measured in detail, they display all the characteristics of other known precision-made hardstone boxes. Far from being the only boxes found at Abu Sir, they're clearly more advanced than the rougher limestone hand-carved examples found in various tombs and chambers on the site. I've been visiting this site for nearly a decade now, and one thing that's granted me is the ability to see changes that happen over time, and unfortunately these changes are not all good. These precious ancient artifacts are still on site near where they were found, although they've been moved a bit, but the fact that they're still on site is a good thing, I think. Unfortunately, the low traffic nature of Abu Sir and the fact that it's just out there in the desert means it's also generally accessible to locals, made painfully obvious with the sheer number of illegal excavations that happened during the Arab Spring. It also means artifacts like these are subject to vandalism, although I honestly can't imagine the mindset of the type of person who would deliberately damage these, but that seems to be exactly what's happened. Take a look at this comparison made between 2016 and 2024. The lid on the smaller box was always in several parts. In fact, it seems to have been repaired in the past, but now it's basically just been smashed into pieces. On the larger box, I originally thought that the lid had been cracked in recent years, but a closer examination of my footage from back in 2016 shows that that crack was always there, although now it's been made significantly worse, with chips coming off, and the large slab of the lid has now been cracked entirely through. It looks to me like large stones have been thrown down on top of these boxes from above. It was tremendously disappointing to see this damage when I last got into the Mastaba to look on these incredible artifacts. These are unique, with unique features that are unlike anything else I've seen on other boxes in Egypt, and what I'm talking about here is the single-piece limestone liner, or inner box, that's set inside the granite outer. This in itself is quite remarkable, and it presents several significant technological and manufacturing challenges beyond the not insignificant challenge in making the granite box in the first place. The smaller of the two boxes shows this limestone lining quite well, and it's a single piece. You can see the difference in stone color on the inner back wall where a section of it has been broken off. It's very tightly fitted inside the box, and given that it's a single piece, I have just no idea how they got this in here. If the limestone inner is so tightly fitted to the granite, you'd need a hole or relief in it somewhere for the air to escape, when the inner box is somehow lowered and fitted in. It begs the question, why is there a limestone liner in this box at all? Has it got something to do with the afterlife? Is there some sort of magical explanation for this? But it reminds me of the megalithic structures that you find on several of these Old Kingdom sites, where you have limestone inner cores that are then cased in granite. There has to be some sort of reason for this inner box to exist. Now, I had always thought that this limestone liner was only a feature found on the smaller of these two boxes, but it turns out that the larger granite box in the Mastaba also has, or at least had, a limestone inner lining. You can't see it when you visit the site today, as the giant heavy slab of the lid is only barely propped up above the box, making it difficult to look inside. But from archival images from when the box was discovered in the 1970s, you can see that it also has a limestone liner. The lid for this box is sitting right next to it, tipped over on its side, and it's definitely the same one that you find today in the chamber of the Mastaba that this footage is from. I'm sorry to say I really don't have any answers here, or even any good speculation as to why these boxes have this feature. It can't have been easy, and it must have had some sort of functional reason, but what that might be remains a mystery. So, I hope you enjoyed this update on the new finds at one of the more enigmatic ancient Egyptian Old Kingdom sites of Abu Sir. The more details I find here on every visit only serve to deepen the level of contradiction and mystery buried in the oldest periods of our past, as yet again we can see solid evidence for stylistic links on sites that are thousands of years apart, evidence for inheritance, longer timelines, and the presence of advanced ancient technology in the remnants of the priceless hardstone artifacts and architecture. There is a real need for more scientific, engineering-oriented investigations at Abu Sir, as I think it contains some of the most accessible and well-preserved examples that could, with minimal and non-invasive work, help to overturn the paradigm that its original builders were loincloth-wearing primitives wielding sticks, stones, and soft copper tools. Maybe the new work that's been happening around the scanning electron microscopy of ancient vase fragments will help to hasten such efforts along. I don't know, I can only hope. If you didn't see my live stream about that work, check it out, the link's below, but a full video getting into the details of this will be coming soon. Quick reminder, if you'd like to visit Abu Sir and tour it with me, along with many of the other epic sites in Egypt, I'll be there in December with Yusuf on his Primordial Egypt tour, and the annual Uncharted X tour with the Snake Bros and a lot more special permissions is going ahead in March of 2025. You can check out all the details on the links below or on my website. As always, a massive thank you to everyone who supports Uncharted X via the value for value model. I really couldn't do this work without your patronage, and if you think the channel is worthy of support, you can check out all the details at unchartedx.com/support. I hope everybody out there is well, and until the next one, bye bye for now.